Lord Glenarthur, before lunch, we'd left matters with you on the 25th of April wanting an update on what had happened with the trial of the leaflets in the regional transfusion centres.
Yes.
If we go next to DHSC 0002309_044, we can see this is a minute of the 10th of August 1984 from Mr. Parker to your Principal Secretary, Mr. Joyce, Private Secretary, Mr. Joyce, revision of leaflet AIDS and how it concerns blood donors. Before we look at the content of it, it would appear that you then therefore didn't get the update, or if so, we haven't traced it until August, so a further period of time elapsed.
Yes.
But in any event, it says, I attach a submission from Mr. Williams which seeks Minister's agreement to the revision of the current AIDS leaflet. I agree with the action recommended in paragraph 10. And then there's reference to the cost of printing up to 1.5 million leaflets. And we see in the last sentence of that paragraph, officials believe, however, that it's vital that the AIDS leaflet should be reproduced and it should be accorded this priority.
Yes.
And just before we go to the submission itself, we can see handwritten on the top, MSH to see. So it sounds as though whether you've decided or an official's decided that the Minister should also see this.
Either my private secretary or I can't recall.
And so if we go over the page, we can see it says, this submission reports to ministers on the experience of the initial issue of the new leaflet, AIDS and how it concerns blood donors, and seeks permission to issue a revised version. The submission also suggests a more uniform and consistent distribution system to be adopted by regional transfusion centres in England and Wales. And then as the background, ministers will recall the first issue of the leaflet was in August 1983, probably 1st of September, but I didn't, that matters. Its aim was to persuade those donors potentially at risk from AIDS not to give their blood. RTDs were asked to distribute it in the way most suitable to their individual service. Ministers asked officials to monitor the distribution, its reception by the blood donor population, and any effect on the numbers volunteering to give blood. And then the next heading is factual content of leaflet. The current AIDS leaflet is now out of date in certain detailed factual matters, and there is a need to strengthen its warning to high-risk groups not to donate, and then there's an attached redrafted leaflet. And then we get the update on the results of the review. Results from the monitoring exercise at paragraph 2 above indicate that the distribution of these leaflets has not caused any fall in the number of blood donors, so it didn't have the adverse consequences that have been feared, that there's been little, if any, adverse comment by donors. However, there was, as anticipated, a wide variation in the manner in which the leaflet has been distributed by the regional transfusion centres. At some centres, all donors were sent the leaflet individually with their recall notifications. Others offered donors the leaflets to read when they attended a donor session, whilst a few centres pursued a policy of having them available for donors to pick up as they wished. We then have the heading Continued Need for a Leaflet. The slow but steady increase in AIDS victims in the UK, 51 cases with 28 deaths up to 30th of June 1984, indicates that the disease is prevalent here. Haemophiliac patients are at greatest risk of contracting the disease, since the clotting agents they need are produced from plasma pooled from a large number of donors. Fortunately, of the UK patients receiving treatment for haemophilia, only 2 have become victims of AIDS, and both have received factor VIII concentrates from US sources as well as the UK. It is known that one patient with AIDS in the UK has been a blood donor. It was possible to trace his donations and eliminate them. It's therefore clear that there continues to be a need for positive action to ensure that donors who may be carrying the transmissible agent for AIDS are dissuaded from giving their blood until a screening test suitable for detecting possible carriers has been developed. And then we have the heading Recommended Distribution. Officials consider that the department would be open to criticism if it failed to take all reasonable, practicable steps to discourage all high-risk donors from giving their blood. It is suggested that all those RTCs who did not send out their leaflet individually to their registered donors should now be asked to do so at the next recall of those donors. This has relatively minor cost implications for some RTCs who've not previously distributed the leaflet in this way. And then some details in relation to the minor costs. And then we see the heading Other Developments, reference in paragraph 7 to a possible test. Paragraph 9 refers to what we saw earlier, the separate issue of the production of a leaflet by the Health Education Council. And then recommended action. Officials recommend the issue of the revised AIDS leaflet for blood donors and a more consistent method of distribution as detailed in paragraph 6. And ministers are asked to agree to the revision of the leaflet, agree to the more consistent and uniformly effective distribution system being adopted as per paragraph 6. So we're now nearly a year on from when the first leaflet had been agreed, are we not?
Yes.
So a lot longer than you'd envisaged with your recommendation for a 3-month trial.
A lot longer, yes.
And we can see there are two aspects of the what was happening where changes are recommended: strengthening the content of the leaflet to ensure that high-risk donors don't get through,
Yes.
and improving the method of distribution. So
Yes.
really, if one thinks back to that submission that you looked at in 1983, that first method of distribution, which I think you'd agreed looked like it was the best method of distribution, that's now going to be adopted nationally.
That seems to be correct, yes.
Would you agree it's highly unsatisfactory that it's the first substantive update you receive is nearly a year on?
Yes, it's less than desirable, but I cannot recall what the reasons were for its delay. I think quite how it came forward, so to speak, from the official side within the department. I cannot. I don't know why it took so long, but it's certainly disappointing.
And then we can see your response at DHSC 0002309_046. This is a minute of the 21st of August 1984 from your private office, and it records this. Lord Glenarthur has seen Mr. Williams' submission of the 8th of August and has commented, "We must take all sensible steps to prevent this disease being transmitted, and I support the recommendations."
Yes.
So you didn't raise any concerns or qualms or need for change?
No, I didn't.
And I think we can see, if we look at the handwritten note at the top of the page, it says MSH, so that's directed to the Minister, Mr.
Yeah.
Clark. Please see the submission attached. Any comments on content for the leaflet to be revised as suggested? ? And it looks as though that was a note written on there on the 14th of September.
Yes.
If we then go to DHSC 0002309_050, we can see this is a minute of the 16th of October 1984. So it looks like it's about not far off 2 months from since you responded, and just over a month from when it looks as though the material was sent to the Minister. And this is on behalf of Mr. Clark, is it not?
Yes, it is.
And it says, we spoke and I confirmed that MSH, that's Mr. Clark, has now seen your submission of the 8th of August under cover of Mr. Parker's minute of the 10th of August and is content for the leaflet to be revised and distributed in the way in which you suggest. I'm sorry this has taken so long to clear. So why it took that long is for Mr. Clark to answer, not you, but
Yep.
It's another month has gone by. We
Absolutely.
can see that. I'm not going to ask you to look at the particular version of the draft leaflet that was then in issue, but what we then see, if we go to DHSC 0002309_053, this is a note from Dr. Smithers on the 19th of November 1984. It's looking overall at various matters relating to AIDS. And if we turn to the bottom of the second page, actually, no, if we turn to the second page, we can see the reference in the first paragraph, news from Australia, 13 people, including 3 babies, have died from AIDS after receiving a blood transfusion, has caused nationwide concern in Australia. Paragraph 2 refers to the death of another haemophiliac patient, a patient in Newcastle who contracted AIDS and had died at the beginning of the month. And then if we go to the bottom of the page, we can see the heading, what's being done to prevent AIDS being transmitted by blood or blood products. Blood donors have had a leaflet since August 1983 available to them, asking any who believe they're in the high-risk groups for AIDS not to give blood. This leaflet attached has been revised to include all practising homosexuals in the high-risk group. It's being printed now and will be given to every donor. The department will issue a circular advising on distribution of the leaflet once it's ready.
Yes.
So, and then it goes on to talk about another number of other matters, some of which we might come back to.
Yeah.
So it would seem that as at the 19th of November, from the perspective of civil servants, the process is underway now to print it and get this new leaflet out.
That's correct.
However, that seems to then have been interrupted by an intervention from the Information Division. And if we can look at DHSC 0002323_014, what we have here is a minute dated the 22nd of November 1984 from Janet Hewlett-Davis. It's addressed to Mr. Cashman, and I think you say in your witness statement that this was a document that was copied to Mr. Clark's and Mr. Patton's private secretaries. Did it come to you?
It appears not.
If we just look further down the page.
Yeah,
so we can
go
see the full
further
list
down
of-
the page. No, it wasn't. If neither of my private secretaries' names appeared there, so I did not see it.
I think you subsequently become aware of it, but at this point in time, it doesn't appear to go to you. But we can see that Mrs. Hewlett-Davis says, I attach a revised version of the leaflet drafted by my publicity branch. Also attached for purposes of comparison of the original leaflet and the first revised version. I endorse your view that the first revise had to be looked at again in the light of recent developments and ministerial statements. The need is for a much more strongly worded leaflet and for urgent approval, production and distribution. I think our draft meets the first need and should be grateful for your support in getting the quickest possible clearance. And now that's addressed to Mr. Cashman. Are you able to assist us with who Mr. Cashman was?
I'm afraid I don't.
Don't worry. In any event, we now have, it would appear, 2 versions of the revised leaflet. The one that had effectively been signed off by ministers pursuant to the submission, but now the Information Division Publicity Branch has done a rewrite. And there are, I think if we look over the page, I'm not going to go through all the differences between the 2 versions, but if we look at the bottom of page 3, we see there the question, how can the risks be reduced? And the last 3 lines read, until there's a reliable test to detect AIDS, donors must not give blood if they think they have the disease or are in one of the risk groups listed below, and then those groups are listed. And one of the differences between the 2 versions, again, I'm not going to compare them in detail, was that a request, donors are asked not to give blood, has become donors must not give blood. That's one of the suggested changes. There are others. If we just go back to the first page of this, sorry, the first page of the document, so the minutes from Mrs. Hewlett-Davis. We'll see in that second paragraph, she's referred to looking at the draft again in the light of recent developments and ministerial statements. And I think I understand from your statement, Lord Glenarthur, that you've taken that to mean possibly a reference to what had happened in Australia a further death of a haemophiliac in the UK, and there'd been some press statements by Mr. Patton.
I believe so. Could you bring me to the reference in my statement,
I can
please?
try, but unhappily I don't think I've written it down, but I'm sure we'll be able to find it.
Sorry.
Thank you. It's, I'm told, yes, page 62, paragraph 46.2. Seamus, if we put Lord Glenarthur's statement back up, WITN
46.2, yes, that's quite long. Yeah.
And we go to page 62. So it's the paragraph with the Roman numeral 6, where you say, however, a minute from Mrs. Hewlett-Davies to colleagues refers to further recommended changes. You say halfway down that paragraph, she refers to making changes to the first revise, having to be looked at again in light of recent developments and ministerial statements. And you suggest that's a reference to Mr. Patton's press statements on the 18th and 19th of November 1984.
I believe so.
And if we can just pick those up, they are at there's a press statement to PRSC 0002251. This is 19th of November. It deals with self-sufficiency and then talks about, this is the third paragraph down, the voluntary blood donor service, and refers to the need to encourage donors not at risk from AIDS to come forward. And if we look at the bottom of the page, there's reference to the replacement leaflet being reprinted with a strengthened message. And then the second press statement actually effectively says pretty much exactly the same thing, but is dated the 18th of November, so I don't think we need to look at that. I think I picked up from your statement, Lord Glenarthur, but I'll check, and I don't think it probably matters one way or another, that part of the context for the further strengthening might have been the news from Australia. And,
yes.
And it was obviously
generally growing concern, I think.
Exactly. And then if we pick matters up next, then, this is still in November, but just a few days later, at DHSC 0000435. This is a minute of the 23rd of November 1984 from Dr. Abrams to Dr. Smithers. The first paragraph is essentially for Lord Clark to answer to, but it refers to Lord Clark having given an ITV interview revealing he has strong, and a briefing session of that revealing he had strong views on spending money on the blood test. If we then look at the next paragraph, it says MSH, so Mr. Clark was content to hold up the donor leaflet until after the working group meeting, but he was obviously satisfied with it as it is at present. And then, and I'm sorry, we have to look at multiple documents to make sense of the chronology. The working group meeting we can see from DHSC 0002251_011. This is a minute dated the 27th of November 1984 from Dr. Abrams to Dr. Harris, and it's entitled Advisory Committee on the National Blood Transfusion Service Working Group on AIDS. That appears to be the working group referred to. And then there's a discussion about the leaflet. We can pick things up. It's the paragraph numbered, first of all, the Roman 4. They, that's, I think, Regional Transfusion no, in fact, well, it may be regional transfusion directors or whoever's on the working party, were not in favour of closer questioning of donors to see if they were homosexual, etc. They were in favour of a local session leaflet such as is used now, which gets people to answer a list of questions, amongst which are the AIDS questions. There was concern that too closer questioning might be counterproductive. And then the next paragraph, subparagraph, deals with the leaflet. There was general endorsement of the latest donor leaflet on AIDS. A few small but important changes suggested which we can take on board. No wish to see a rewrite. In Scotland, the leaflet mentions the countries where AIDS is prevalent, not wanted in our version. This should be covered either by the session doctor or the leaflet locally, and it's explained why they didn't want reference to prevalent countries. So that appears to be the working group meeting that took place on the 27th of November. In the meantime, no, in fact, a few days later, DHSC 0002309_056 this is a minute sent on behalf of Mr. Patton, I think, PSH.
Yes.
Has seen Mrs. Hewlett-Davis's minute of the 22nd of November and the revised leaflet, and has commented, content with this line, if MSH, Mr. Clark, PSL, that's you, are. And we can see it's addressed to your private office in part here. So you've
Correct.
come back into the loop in any event by
Yep.
this time. And then if we go to DHSC 0002309_058. We're now at the 3rd of December. Again, this is from Dr. Abrams in Med SEB to Mr. Naismith. So that's Mr. Clark's private office, I think. It says MSH cleared the revised leaflet for blood donors on the 16th of October. So that's before Mrs. Hewlett-Davis's changes, and subsequently agreed to delay the printing of the revised leaflet until it could be discussed at the meeting of the Working Group on AIDS on the 27th of November. At that meeting, members had only minor comments to make on the current draft, which are appended. They considered the information in the leaflet was sufficient to give adequate warning to donors in the risk group for AIDS and would not deter other volunteers. If MSH, so Mr. Clark, is content, arrangements can be made for printing the leaflet and for distributing it to regional transfusion centres, who will be requested to ensure that all donors receive the leaflet. And we can see that's copied, amongst others, to Mr. Joyce. So that's going to your private office, yeah?
Yes, I've seen it.
And then, if we go to DHSC 0002309_117, this is on your behalf on the 4th of December 1984. Lord Glenarthur has seen Mrs. Hewlett-Davis's minute of the 22nd of November. Mrs. Nolan's of the 30th of November is content with the revised wording. So, I think, is this right? Back in, let's check the date now. I think it's back in August. You'd been happy with the original redrafted leaflet. You've now been sent Mrs. Hewlett-Davis's redraft. You're happy with that?
That's correct, it appears, yes.
Is it right to understand your primary concern was just to get the revised leaflet out there?
Yes, I'm sure it was. It did seem a protracted and rather bureaucratic process to get it approved and out where it should be, but that seemed to be the system at the time.
And then, if we go to DHSC 0002309_060, this is the 14th of December. It's from Mr. or Ms. Harris and HS1.
Yes.
To Ms. Bateman. Again, I'm not sure who that is, but no doubt we can check. Copied in any event to Mr. Joyce, so copied to your private office. It refers in the second paragraph to a revision of the present leaflet having been sent to the Minister of State for Health under cover of the Dr. Abraham's minute of the 3rd of December. Oh yes, so I'm told Ms. Bateman is in the private office of Mr. Clark.
Mm-hmm.
And then paragraph 3, a revised leaflet for blood donors is one of the government's announced responses to the AIDS problem. It's therefore highly desirable that action on this is taken forward in the near future. So it would appear to be, is this fair, the HS branch chasing Mr. Clark's private office for a response?
It looks like it, but I can't be absolutely sure. That seems to be the meaning of this.
And then if we go to DHSC 0002327_127, we're now at the 20th of December 1984. This is from Mr. Williams in HS1 to Miss Bateman, so again to the Minister's private office. Paragraph 1, this note gives ministers information about recent publicity on AIDS transmission in the press today, CMOs, that's the Chief Medical Officer's interviews with the media in his press statement, and seeks MSH's, so Mr. Clark's, urgent clearance of the revised text of the leaflet, AIDS, and how it concerns blood donors. And then there's an update on recent cases. If we go further down, there's a reference to the Chief Medical Officer's press statement. And then at paragraph 4, under the heading Revision of Leaflet, these developments re-emphasise the need for the department to produce the revised version of the leaflet AIDS and how it affects blood donors. The National Blood Transfusion Service cannot be asked to effect a more positive distribution of these leaflets until ministers have approved the text. MSH's approval of the revised text, as set out in Dr. Abraham's minute of the 3rd of December 1984, is sought urgently. I think on any view, that's chasing the Minister for a response.
Yes, absolutely.
Part of the problem here is, I suspect, a perennial problem in politics, which is that events have a habit of catching up before action may be taken.
I suspect that is absolutely true, Sir Brian. There were so many other things going on across the range of activities which all of us had to deal with, and probably Mr. Clark in particular as Minister for Health, that not everything came to the top of the pile of matters to be signed off at the appropriate time.
What interests me, particularly in something which is dealing with public perception and public attitude, is that it's on the 20th of December that this minute from HS1A talks about the Guardian article then reporting upon the cases of those who had been blood donors but who had had AIDS.
Yes.
But it was actually known about, I think, on the 30th of November, which is some 3 weeks earlier, and we do have reference to it. It's DHSC 302309_057, if I'm not mistaken.
Bring that up.
I don't know if Shumik has that.
It's on the screen, sir.
Thank you. And this is the 30th of November. So
Yes.
This is to ministers. Who is it to? So Mr. Joyce is the...
To my private secretary, copied to a lot of others.
Yes. So this is, so far as the leaflet is concerned, if it was out of date because it was trying to catch up with what Mr. Patton had been saying about recent developments, it was even now more out of date, presumably.
Well, so it would seem, but I cannot recollect quite what, I can't recollect the reason for the delay between the various ministerial offices, I'm afraid. It's impossible now.
Does the overall delay, do you think, fit the the epithet unconscionable which you used earlier?
It was taking far too long. And why it took so long, I honestly do not know, and nor could I really influence it, frankly.
No, it's not your responsibility,
Yeah.
but you were there, and you can see if there's any obvious reason why it should have taken quite so long to change a word here or there in a document.
The procedure for approving leaflets and press notices did seem to me to be very bureaucratic and slow, and certain ministers took a great deal of trouble over ensuring that by saying certain things in their documents, they weren't generating hostages to fortune. They wanted to get it absolutely right, bearing in mind the practicalities, the politics, press interest, etc. And maybe I was not as sensitive, if that's the right word, I don't know, to those concerns as some of my colleagues were. So I was keen to get the thing moving and get it out.
Well, you've described how part of that feeling on your part probably arose from your experience of the aircraft industry, where safety is a matter of urgency wherever it arises.
Yes, I think that was my attitude towards risk generally, that risk was, you didn't take risks unless there were some extraordinarily good reasons, and even then you would have to justify yourself if anything went wrong. In this particular case, as I said earlier, on the question of risk that haemophiliacs were in a serious degree of peril if they didn't get factor VIII, and that had to be 50% from America, or not have any at all, because that was another option. The two were in conflict, and one was rather less bad than the other. And I had a more absolute view of risk in those days because of what I was doing just before I joined the government. But that I think is the way I rationalised it at the time.
Thank you.
But before we take this document down, and on a slightly separate topic, but one that we will either come back to later today or tomorrow morning, Lord Glenarthur, just invite your attention to paragraph 3 of this note,
Yeah.
which says knowledge of these incidents, particularly A, sorry, just so that we can see the whole thing. Can we just go back to the top? So we can see it at A is the description of a donor who subsequently developed AIDS, blood donations, plasma used to make a batch of factor VIII given to 38 haemophiliacs, and so on. Paragraph 3 says knowledge of these incidents, particularly A, is becoming more widespread and is likely to reach the media before long. Haemophilia centre directors managing the haemophiliacs involved may well feel that they have to inform their patients of the situation. And I just draw attention to that because the question of information for patients is one I'm going to return to.
Okay.
If we then, returning to the leaflet issue, go to DHSC 0002309_062. Now, this is also the 20th of December 1984. So, on the same date as a chasing minute is sent, chasing the minister. In fact, on that date, the minister's private office replies to Dr. Abraham's earlier minute of the 3rd of December. MSH, this is paragraph 2, is now seeing your revised version of the leaflet AIDS and how it concerns blood donors. So that's the one circulated, I think, under the with the original submission, together with the information division version, so Mrs. Hewlett-Davis's version. His initial reaction to both was that we may need to look at some of the assurances again in the light of the publicity surrounding the 2 cases involving blood transfusions. On presentation, MSH saw nothing wrong with your revised text, but felt that the language of the ID version conveyed the message more effectively. I should be grateful, therefore, if you and your medical policy division colleagues would cooperate with information division in producing a third and hopefully final version of the leaflet based upon the Information Division text to take account of any recent significant developments and amend it as necessary to ensure medical accuracy. I appreciate the need to produce the revised leaflet as soon as possible. However, I understand that the forthcoming Christmas break will inevitably delay printing until the new year. That being so, I should be grateful if you could ensure that MSH has an opportunity to comment I think that should be on, the agreed version before printing and distribution goes ahead. So, again, the reason for this approach is a question for Mr. Clark, Lord Clark, not for you, Lord Glenarthur, but just so that we can understand where we've got to by Christmas 1984. There is the first version, so to speak, that I think both you and Mr. Patton were content with. There's the revised version produced by Mrs. Hewlett-Davis that you were content with. The minister's now looked at both and wants, for reasons no doubt he'll be able to tell us about, there to be a third version agreed that would then hopefully, presumably, be the version that goes out for publication. And we can see, that being the 20th of December, that actually the third version is produced the next day, DHSC 0002309_063. So we can see this is from R. Windsor in the Information Division, 21st of December 1984, to Mr. Naismith in the Minister's private office. In the light of MSH's comments, we've reconsidered the text of this leaflet with colleagues from Medical and Health Services divisions. The further revised text is attached. This retains the general direct style and presentation of the ID draft, but incorporates various detailed changes that were felt to be desirable. We've also reordered the questions and answers, subject to some final consultations by Dr. Smithers on whether it's advisable to retain the brief mention of Haiti and Central Africa. We're agreed that this draft should be both effective and acceptable to donors and the National Blood Transfusion Service. Note, apparently the directors of the RTCs are a bit concerned about this, although the department doesn't mind either way. If MSH is content, we will put the leaflet into production immediately after the break. So we've got the third version of the leaflet here. And then, if we go to, there are some handwritten comments from Mr. Clark, but we can see them in a typed up form. If we go to DHSC 0002309_064, this is a minute of the 31st of December 1984 from Mr. Clark's private office to Mr. Windsor. MSH has seen your submission of the 21st of December and has commented, is it still true to say that there's only a remote chance of anyone getting AIDS from an ordinary blood transfusion, as it says at the top of page 2? I remain wary of offering to promise blood screening tests and heat treatments. I would therefore like to leave out the paragraph at the bottom of page 3, what's being done, etc. Otherwise, okay. And then WITN 52822014 we're now 2nd of January 1985. And if we look at paragraph 2, so I should say this is from Mr. Harrison, HS1, to Mr. Williams. I don't think this is a document copied to your office. But the second paragraph says, given the particular sensitivity of this issue, I think we need to do a little more than just ask the RHAs, that's the regional health authorities, to get on with it. I would suggest the circular tell them to report back within 1 month of date of issue, confirming all donors have had the leaflet presented to them. And that's because there was going to be a circular to the regional health authorities introducing the new leaflet, I think.
Yes.
So that's what this is commenting on, 2nd of January 1985. And then we see that getting to you at DHSC 0002309_065. January 3rd, for Mr. Williams, to, amongst others, Mr. Joyce in your private office, submission to Ministers' Health Circular issuing leaflet, AIDS, important new advice for blood donors. 1. Ministers have agreed that as a matter of urgency, the revised leaflet, AIDS, important new advice for blood donors, should be reprinted and that it should be distributed on an individual basis to all blood donors. 2. I should be grateful for Ministers' agreement to the issue of the attached draft health circular, which asks regional health authorities to implement this decision. If we go over the page, we'll see the text of the proposed circular to regional health authorities. Paragraph 1, this circular asks regional health authorities to ensure that the revised leaflet is distributed individually to every blood donor. The background is set out in paragraph 2, including the variable distribution method between different transfusion centres. Paragraph 3, the leaflet has now been revised, most significantly in extending the high-risk groups who should not donate blood. The opportunity has been taken to amend the layout and update factual matters. And then paragraph 4 talks about distribution. Ministers have decided it's essential that the revised leaflet be brought to the attention of each donor on an individual basis, and this is further explained. The next page explains that the department's going to meet the cost of printing the revised leaflet. So you, amongst others, were asked to agree to that, and we can see your response. DHSC 0002482_011. January 1985 from Mr. Joyce. This is to confirm my telephone message that Lord Glenarthur and PSH, so that's Mr. Patton too, I think still, are content with the draft as finally revised accompanying your minute of the 3rd of January. And then there's a reference to Mr. Patton being content to revert to the word serious rather than killer disease. I don't need to ask you about that.
No, I don't.
So we finally got to the 15th of January 1985. Do you attach any significance to the fact that finally has been put in quotation marks? Was there an element of frustration here being expressed on your behalf by Mr. Joyce?
Perhaps from both of us, both Mr. Patton and myself, but I couldn't be sure. But it was taking an awful long time.
And then there's a press release, which, to complete this saga, I'll just put up on screen. DHSC 0002311_053. This is the draft press release. The significance is really just the date, 1st of February 1985. It deals with the setting up of the expert advisory group. It deals with the question of a screening test. And then if we go to the next page, we can see here reference to the leaflet, and it refers in the first line to the publication today and the supply to regions of the revised leaflet, AIDS, important new advice for blood donors, which regional health authorities have been asked to ensure is distributed individually to all blood donors. The leaflet lists those at risk from AIDS, practising homosexual and bisexual men, drug abusers, both men and women who inject drugs, and the sexual contacts of people in these groups. It stresses that donors in the risk groups must not give blood, as they may unknowingly be carriers of the AIDS virus. So if we then stand back, having looked at all the detail, and I'm afraid it was painfully necessary to go through it just to see what was happening, we have a leaflet that was due to be reviewed around December 1983, because that's the end of the 3 months that you'd asked for would have expired at the end of November 1983. We saw from the minute from Dr. Smithers in February 1984 the need for both strengthening the wording of the leaflet and changing the method of distribution was identified in February of 1984 within the department, hadn't got to you at that point. It's another year before the leaflet's finally distributed at the beginning of February 1985. Now, you say in your statement, ideally, that should have been achieved more quickly. I'm going to suggest to you that that's something of an understatement, Lord Glenarthur. It was an absurdly long period of time, was it not, for such an important public health measure?
Yes, it was, and quite how it came about and the continual toing froing within the department and between ministers' offices, tweaking the leaflet and the statements that go with it, were frustrating. And I think you can see that from both my comments and, to some extent, John Patton's comments. But on the other hand, Mr. Clark had strong views on these things. He was dealing with lots of other things, and it may have been that he didn't quite perceive the same degree of urgency when he looked at it as those of us who were more immediately involved. But that is, me looking back.
Yes.
38 years later.
Absolutely, and I'll ask Lord Clark about that. Before we move on from this topic, I just want to refer to one further document. It's HSOC 0016001. And if we look at the left-hand column, if we look at the top of the page, first
Yes.
of all, so this is an item in The Guardian, 20th of November 1984. And we can see, and this is really just to show why this was so important, Lord Glenarthur. I don't think you disagree with this. Warning to gays still donating blood. Homosexuals in London. Chairman, could we zoom in on the left-hand side, the long column on the left, just so that it's easier to read?
Yep.
Homosexuals in London have continued to donate blood despite warnings that they risk infecting patients with the AIDS virus. It was disclosed yesterday. Doctors and organisations for gays blame the Department of Health for failing to issue clear guidelines and called for the introduction of a blood test to screen all donors. The homosexual donors have been identified by doctors at the North London Transfusion Centre's West End branch. They thought the Department of Health leaflets asking promiscuous homosexuals not to donate did not apply to them because they did not consider themselves promiscuous, said the Centre's Deputy Director, Dr. Patricia Hewitt. If we just read further down, see if we could zoom in again. Her centre has overprinted the department's leaflet with a request that practising homosexuals should refrain from donating. I suspect it's only a matter of time before a male donor, whether he realises he is at risk or not, transmits AIDS, she said. The Junior Health Minister, Mr. John Patton, said yesterday that he would be issuing clearer guidelines. Gays should not donate blood, he added. And then there's a discussion about various other matters, which I don't think I need to ask you to look at. That's a powerful reminder, is it not, Lord Glenarthur, of why the revised leaflet needed to be produced and distributed much quicker than it was?
Yes, I think it is. I don't recall now that particular article.
No.
But it is a very strong piece indeed.
Now I'm going to move now to a separate topic. The question of the recommendations of the Council of Europe from June of 1983. Mm-hmm. We can start just by looking at the recommendations themselves. MACK 0000307. We go to the second page. Council of Europe Committee of Ministers recommendation number R838, and then if we look at the words in italics underneath the title, adopted by the Committee of Ministers on the 23rd of June 1983 at the 361st meeting of the Ministers' Deputies. There's then a number of basic principles set out. I won't read those aloud. But if we go over the page, we just see the recommendations, and there's one I'm going to ask you about in particular shortly. Recommends the governments of member states, 1, to take all necessary steps and measures with respect to AIDS, and in particular, to avoid wherever possible the use of coagulation factor products prepared from large plasma pools. This is especially important for those countries where self-sufficiency in the production of such products has not yet been achieved. To inform attending physicians and selected recipients, such as haemophiliacs, of the potential health hazards of haemotherapy and the possibilities of minimising these risks, and then to provide all blood donors with information on AIDS so that those in risk groups will refrain from donating. And that third point, obviously, is then reflected in the issue of the leaflet that we've just been examining. So those are the recommendations of the Council of Europe. As I say, I'll come back to one of them in particular in a moment. If we then just look at how this matter came before you, DHSC 0002309_086. So this is a minute from Mr. Cumming to Mr. Lupton and Mrs. Walden, but then we can see written on the right-hand side in handwriting copy to, amongst others, Mr. Joyce.
Yes.
So it comes to you. Recommendations, resolutions, etc. by international bodies. From time to time, we submit to ministers international instruments which involve DHSS interests. It is normal practice during the preparation of these documents to ensure that the UK is not committed to policies which would not otherwise be followed, so that there is correspondingly no action to be taken if and when they're adopted. 2, however, recommendations or undertakings in international agreements are often of interest to pressure groups, etc., and it is thought that ministers may wish to be aware of recommendation R83-8, which was adopted by the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe on the 23rd of June 1983. The subject to the recommendations, the prevention of transmission of acquired immune deficiency syndrome from affected blood donors to patients receiving blood or blood products. On the basis of present knowledge, it is assumed that AIDS is transmissible by blood, and the recommendation aims to ensure that appropriate precautions are taken in the preparation of certain blood products, and that specific groups of recipients, such as haemophiliacs, are accordingly reassured. An information leaflet for blood donors used by the American Red Cross is appended to the recommendation for the convenience of national blood transfusion services wishing to draw up their own leaflet. The recommendation doesn't prevent the UK from continuing to import Factor VIII concentrate from the USA, on whom we currently rely for about 50% of our supply. 6, a copy of the recommendation is attached. So we can see that you are actually being sent the recommendation itself. Yes. And your response at DHSC 0002309_029 22nd of July 1983 from Mr. Joyce. Lord Glenarthur has seen Mr. Cummings' minute of undated July and thinks we should accept the recommendation. He also feels there might be merit in referring to the European advice when MSH announces the publication of our own leaflet to potential blood donors. Does MSH agree? And we can just note, if we look further down, where the list of people being copied in is set out, it says, Lord Glenarthur has asked if we have a publication date for our leaflet in view. So that's back in terms of the 1983 first leaflet.
It's the first leaflet, yes.
Just note that. So you've seen the recommendation, and your general comment is we should accept it.
Can we just go back to the recommendation again?
Absolutely. MACK 0000307. And we go to the second page, or the next page, sorry, Shemik. So those are the recommendations.
To take all necessary steps to avoid, wherever possible, the use of coagulation factor products prepared from large plasma pools. And the United States is one of those, to inform attending physicians and selected recipients, and to provide all blood donors with information on AIDS. Yes, those all seemed to me to be sensible. The middle one, informing attending physicians and selected recipients. If I recall, the department didn't actually advise doctors who were treating patients. That was done, but the relationship between the clinician and the patient was sacrosanct, and the information which was necessary for the doctor who was treating the patient would have been gleaned from various professional sources which he or she would have had access to. So there may have been a view at the time, although I simply can't recall, that in all that central one to inform attending physicians, etc., was going to be difficult to achieve, but I can't really remember the detail.
Well, you're right to alight upon that one, because that's the one I want to ask you about.
Okay.
Before I do that, can I just invite you to agree with me that it's identifying two cohorts who should be provided with information: attending physicians, i.e. those involved in
Yes.
treating patients with coagulation factor products, and then the patients themselves who are receiving them, so selected recipients such as haemophiliacs.
Yes.
So they're the two cohorts which governments are recommended to take all necessary steps and in particular provide information to. And then the category of information, or the categories of information that this is concerned with, again, is twofold. Information about the potential health hazards of haemotherapy, so the risks, in other words.
Yes.
And this is all in the context of AIDS, so it must be sensibly talking about the risks of AIDS.
Yes.
And then the possibilities of minimising these risks, i.e. things that could be done, steps that could be taken to reduce the risk. So those are the two categories of information. Now, you're absolutely right as far as I'm currently aware, Lord Glenarthur, when you say the department didn't do anything. I'm paraphrasing what you said a few moments ago, but it didn't take any particular steps in relation to either of these matters. And I just want to explore with you a little, before we break the afternoon break, as to why that was the case and whether that was the right course to take. So if we start with the question of information to clinicians, I'm going to invite you to look at how you deal with this in your witness statement. So can we have the statement back up again, Seamus, WITN 5282001. And then there are, I think, probably two passages that we should look at in your statement. The first is on page 47. If we just start at page 46, Seamus, we can see the heading.
Yes.
The Council of Europe recommendation. And then if we go to page 47, paragraph 31.4, you refer in paragraph 31.3 to the minute that we've just looked at, in which you said we should accept the recommendation. And then you say, I do not recall taking any further personal action. You note that the covering minute didn't suggest there were areas in which the UK was failing to meet the standards of the recommendation. And it's right, Lord Glenarthur, you weren't asked to take any particular decisions in relation to that, as far as I'm aware. And then if we look just further down this paragraph, please, Seamus. So you deal with the information recommendation, if I can call it that, in subparagraph Roman numerals 3. You say, actually, sorry, can I pick it up in subparagraph 2 to make sense of it? You say in subparagraph 2, dealing with the issue about large plasma pool products, I'm certain any recommendations on avoiding products from large plasma pools would have been fully considered by officials, including medical advisors. I do not believe that I would have taken direct action myself. The same applies to information to be supplied to practitioners and patients such as haemophiliacs. It's difficult to remember what I would have been told or known about the information available. And then you refer to a letter that was sent to Baroness Masham, and we'll come on to that later. And then you say in the last part of that subparagraph, equally, I cannot remember any suggestion by the Haemophilia Society when I met with its representatives on the 8th of September 1983 that information for patients was lacking. So that's you deal expressly with the Council of Europe recommendation there. And then if we go to page 112 of your statement, sorry, let me pick it up first of all on page 110. The heading there, role of the Chief Medical Officer, so you were asked some questions. So I'll wait till you've got the page. I'm sorry.
110, role of the
Page 110, role of the Chief Medical Officer.
Yes.
You were asked some questions asked to address some questions in your statement about the role of the Chief Medical Officer. And if we go to the next page, page 111, paragraph 98.1, you say, I've been asked whether I personally gave consideration to asking the Chief Medical Officer to issue guidance, advice or instructions, etc., on issues such as the risks of infection from blood or blood products, the information to be provided to patients regarding such risks, or the circumstances in which patients should or should not receive treatment with blood or blood products. And then you say, in practical terms, the response to AIDS was generally handled at Deputy Chief Medical Officer or below. You say in the last sentence of that paragraph, I cannot reliably say now whether any one of these issues might have been raised or debated by me with senior medical officers. It would be speculation now after so much time has passed. And then if we go to the bottom of the next page, bottom of page 112, paragraph 99.4, you say this, in relation to direct advice from the department to clinicians or their patients about the risks of blood products, I do not think that this would have been considered appropriate. Again, the treatment of haemophilia was a specialised area of expertise, and the department was in the position of receiving information and advice from the clinicians concerned, and you refer to Dr. Gunson and the Committee on the Safety of Medicine subcommittee. As far as I'm aware, the department did not have any information about risks that was not available to those clinicians, and I do not think that the department would have felt it appropriate to have offered guidance in those circumstances. So is this a fair reflection of your evidence, Lord Glenarthur? You weren't asked to consider this matter by officials. You didn't raise it proactively yourself, and then you're here expressing the view that you don't think it would have been considered appropriate for the department to provide such information to clinicians or patients.
I think it was more that the officials within the department who were the experts in this particular field didn't come forward to me with any particular direction which they encouraged ministers to take, rather than the other way around. I do not recall a submission, and I don't think I've seen them amongst all these papers, from ministers, from officials, particularly drawing to my attention or to any of my colleagues' attention how those three elements should be handled, and particularly the middle one. I just don't recall it at all.
Yes, well, I think you don't recall it, Lord Glenarthur, because as far as I think everyone's aware, there wasn't one.
There wasn't one.
So you're right that the matter was not, as far as we know, raised with you by officials.
No, and if it wasn't highlighted like that, as something, Minister, this is extremely important. We need to have your view in it. Our advice is as follows. That never came forward.
So can I now then take the two groups of identified in the Council of Europe recommendation separately and ask you to reflect first of all upon the provision of information to clinicians. You say in this paragraph that we have still on screen, paragraph 99.4 of your statement, you don't think that would have been considered appropriate.
By the department necessarily,
Yes.
Not by me.
Yes. No, I understand that. In a sense, these are hypothetical questions because you were not asked expressly to consider this at the time.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind that the UK had signed up to, effectively, the Council of Europe recommendation, would you at least expect the department to have made some steps to satisfy itself as to what information attending physicians, haemophilia clinicians, as a matter of fact, had about the risks of treatment in relation to AIDS and possible ways of minimising risks?
Yes, I think I would. This was the first European initiative that I had come across in my ministerial days, and as you see, it's pretty early on in that period. I don't think I came across any others during my time in DHSS, but I would have expected the officials involved to have noted these in detail, and if necessary, to make a recommendation to ministers about how it should be taken forward. It appears that that was not the case, and I can't add to that.
No, because again, this is really inviting you to consider this as a general proposition. It might turn out that those clinicians have all the requisite information and that the department has nothing to add.
Yes.
But unless you ask, you don't know. And this was a rapidly developing field, was it not, in terms of AIDS?
Yes, it was rapidly developing.
And then if we turn to the question of the provision of information to patients, again, no evidence that this matter was expressly put before you for you to either note or reach any decision on. But would you agree as a matter of principle that it was of fundamental importance that by whatever route, patients were made aware of the risks and of the ways in which those risks could be minimised so that they could take informed decisions as to what treatments to receive?
Yes, looking at it now, that seems absolutely right. Quite how it was going to be portrayed to them at the time is something I don't think I can easily answer now. We had sent out we were planning to send out the first leaflet warning people basically that, giving blood if you were at risk was something that was likely to potentially contaminate be contaminated if you had AIDS, etc. I don't recall any more stringent advice, suggestions, recommendations coming to me or indeed my colleagues to say that we have to make our concerns more widely known because we go back to the earlier stage, the risk was considered to be extremely small, or words to that effect, and that the risks of people not accepting the necessary factors to maintain their health because of this small risk was likely to be much more damaging than having the imported factor rate in this particular case. So I cannot recall the debate on how or whether or not and in what way any method was being considered as to how to explain this to patients.
Whatever the magnitude of the risk and how those two competing considerations might be balanced, and we'll come back to that probably tomorrow morning, but you, as in the department, the government, had signed up to effectively or accepted this recommendation, which made clear, did it not, that patients were to be informed of risks and ways of minimising risks. I'm slightly paraphrasing the words of the recommendation. So would you accept it was, in those circumstances, it was incumbent upon the department to do one or both of the following? To seek to ascertain what information was generally being given to patients, and I don't for a moment suggest that somehow the department should have contacted every haemophilia patient in the country and asked them individually, but through some means tried to establish what information was being provided, whether by asking UK HCDO or otherwise. And secondly, to have then considered the adequacy of that and to have considered whether further information needed to be provided to haemophiliacs to comply with the recommendation.
Those both seem reasonable, and what I cannot tell now is why a firm recommendation was not made to ministers that this is what ought to be done. It didn't happen.
No, you're absolutely right. It didn't happen.
It didn't happen, and I dare say that if a submission had been made through me or directly to other ministers making such a recommendation, that would have been considered, but it didn't happen. So for whatever reason, it didn't happen.
And you don't know, I think, why it didn't happen?
I honestly do not know. What I do note from this, that one of the recommendations was that what appeared in that directive, if that's the right term, from the EC, as it was at the time, that we were able to continue to use imported factor VIII. I recall that quite clearly from having reread it. But I don't recall any suggestion coming to ministers that these three elements that we've talked about were crucial, and particularly the middle one, and the ministers we had to consider and advise ministers on how this should be handled.
And just really to complete the position in relation to the provision of information to patients, we've obviously looked in some detail at the leaflet that was produced, essentially reflecting what the third recommendation was talking about, that was designed to go to donors,
yes,
to try and prevent high-risk donors from donating blood. And that was, I mean, we see reference to 1.5 million leaflets being printed and so on. Is there any practical reason you can think of, and again, I asked this knowing you weren't asked to think about this at the time, any practical reason you can think of, or principled reason you can think of, why an equivalent process, production of a leaflet, could not have been undertaken, which would then have been provided to a defined and smaller cohort, several thousand, of haemophiliac patients?
Not now, I can't, quite honestly.
And then just more broadly, in terms of the role of the Secretary of State, the role of the department in terms of responding to public health threats, would you accept, as a matter of generality, that the provision of information generally about public health threats should be something very much at the heart of the work that the Department of Health and Social Services undertakes?
I don't think I could comment on the generality, because I was dealing with one particular issue, and I don't think there were any others in my areas of responsibility that would fit that. But yes, and we see it today when there's particular concern about another condition, not related in any sense, but
yes.
but we were hit by surprises, and I don't know whether any other advice was ever given on other issues to patients generally by the department through any system that existed to spread it around. I just do not know.
Sir, I'm going to move to a slightly different topic, so probably a perfect moment for the afternoon break.
Yes, certainly. Well, we'll take half an hour and come back at 3:45.